Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Deplorable Acts in Human History with Griffin Ryan and our other co-host, Hayden Amtower. Today we are focusing on the Cambodian genocide, and we're here with our special guest, Atticus McCoo.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem.
Very glad to be here.
So we're just going to start off with some quick general information. It's the Cambodian genocide started in 1975, and it lasted till 1979 in what was called the Democratic Kampuchea. And it was led by the Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot. So, you know what? We're going to go with Atticus McCoo here on the synopsis of Pol Pot.
Well, this man, Pol Pot, he was a very strong leader, very effective, which was why he was able to convince the people to take part in these terrible acts. He was a very strict Marxist. That means he was a commie, and he was willing to do anything to promote his ideals. And when the Cambodian genocide started, he was about 49 years old. Cambodia at the time, before this, was a French colony, so he was educated in France himself. And that's where he was educated.
Thank you for that. And so just some quick general information. During this genocide, around 1.6 to 1.8 million people were killed, about 25% of the population. And it's interesting how it started. It started off in small rural villages and expanded vastly to cities and eventually took over the entire nation. So,
wow.
Hayden, why don't you give us some examples of what went on in modern-day Cambodia during the genocide?
So, when the genocide started, when the Khmer Rouge took over in 1975, the king, or the prince of Cambodia, had left, and that's when Pol Pot took over. He wanted to turn it into a communist agrarian utopia, so what he did was he kicked all the people out of the cities and basically turned everyone into peasants. When he did this, he wanted everyone to be exactly the same, and he didn't want people just to get the same things as most people would want in a communist regime. He wanted everyone to think exactly the same. He wanted everyone to have his exact same mindset, and pretty much he didn't want anybody to differ whatsoever. So when it all started, he started off by killing anybody that was in any opposition whatsoever, and anybody that was seen to be well off whatsoever. Actually, one of the things that he did was anybody, even if you wore glasses, you were seen as superior, so he killed all of them off.
Wow, that's an aggressive tactic right there.
Yeah, and also it's hard. Like in many genocides, there is a clear, defined person that you're persecuting, but in this, there really wasn't. Like, many people died for no reason, and for example, if just people for living in cities would have been killed, and but one major definable target within the genocide were Buddhists, which Cambodia had a pretty large Buddhist population,
and Vietnam had a similar experience.
Similar experience,
yeah.
Exactly. And what ended up happening is about 80% of Buddhist monks were killed.
Wow.
10% went missing.
So they probably died too.
Yeah, so around 90% of all Buddhist monks were basically just wiped out, and along with their temples and religion, and Cambodia became basically a religiousless state, which basically follows after the Communist Manifesto,
the Marxist theories.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Hayden, I know that during the genocide there were a lot of torture going on. Can you give us some examples of what went on in these torture camps?
Well, so first thing that they did was they turned schools into the torture camps and prisons, because under Pol Pot, one of his biggest things was that there would be no more education, and education was not needed.
That sounds like a great idea for a utopian society.
He didn't want anybody to think any different, so he gave people like the general knowledge of what he was thinking, but he didn't let anybody think for themselves whatsoever. So these schools were turned into prisons, and people were just brutally tortured in here. I think it was somewhere along the lines of 90% of the people that were put into the prisons died. So if you were put into one of these, you did not make it out, and it wasn't. It definitely wasn't a good stay. People were tortured absolutely worse than most genocides you've ever
Some of the
heard.
stories that are just like very gruesome, and one of the tactics that I know about that I read about was that they would basically crucify you, right? But they would hold you horizontally with your
Oh,
head
boy.
over like a bucket of water. So you had to keep your head against the board, and eventually
Oh, and you would
just
sink
tired,
into
and
it.
you would just be like, dude.
Oh.
Like eventually you would just drown yourself because you can't force yourself up, and eventually your neck would just give out.
That is really awful.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And you know what? And it's pretty interesting that we're here in Stores because right next door to us, University of Connecticut has done some amazing work with Cambodian refugees, especially dealing with their psychological health. And we tried to reach out to them. We got some answers, but due to time constraints, we just couldn't meet up with them. But some of the work, they basically are leading the work in terms of how to help and aid Cambodian refugees that are still alive, living within the United States.
That is important.
So that's just
They do have a lot of trouble kind of communicating with them, though,
Yeah.
not only because of the language barrier, but also the Cambodians were taught throughout their life not to let out their problems. And
they model it
actually-
after a tree that even in the wind it doesn't make sound. So like the whole ideal was like no matter what, don't say anything.
Huh.
And so like it's
Probably
interesting.
one of the things that led to the genocide.
And this has
maybe.
led to a lot of stress problems. There's been studies done, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
stress issues or stress related issues, heart problems, and
Yeah.
stuff like that among these people that were in this genocide.
And what's interesting about this is that unlike other genocides, like even with the Holocaust, there was substantial word from Europe and from other military groups that said that that was going on. But with this, there was only rumors. You know, Cambodia wasn't. After the French left, there wasn't really much communication with the outside world, and even Amnesty International at the time didn't really believe in those rumors, which was odd because, you know, they're the people that usually are the ones that would that say no, these aren't just rumors. And
One would hope.
and it wasn't until there was Pol Pot had some basically military movements into Vietnam where Vietnam retaliated, and we're able to see there were genocidal acts occurring in Cambodia, and essentially that let the world know that there was something going down in Cambodia. But yet there wasn't really much action taken after that.
Well, along with the well-off people,
Yeah.
some of the first people he killed was all media was banished from there.
Yeah.
And I remember reading about something. There were actually a few people that had seen fires burning from over
Yeah.
in Vietnam, and they kind of could tell there was something wrong. 'Cause
Yeah.
there were these giant fires burning. in
But I
those
imagine no one
villages.
was allowed in or out.
No.
No. And also, when the Communist Party took over, didn't they also basically remove or kill all the health personnel, like doctors? And
Yes, doctors, and that was just not only was it did they just kill them for no reason, but they killed them because they were also educated people.
Yeah, and because of this, a lot of people in Cambodia died because of diseases and that couldn't be treated.
Right.
And something that was actually very special or significant about this, the Khmer Rouge, is that they had a very odd type of leadership. Pol Pot and the higher ranking leaders of their party were basically in the jungle, and no one knew who they were. It wasn't like Hitler giving out strict orders or Stalin or it was more like Vietnam, a Ho Chi Minh kind of hidden, and it kind of shows how devoted the people of Cambodia that were participating in these acts were to Pol Pot. They didn't know how to say him. All it took was his word to commit these acts. So it really shows the effectiveness of his leadership at this time. But so eventually the prince returned to Cambodia, right?
Yes,
So why don't you tell us about that?
So in the beginning, when the prince had left, the Khmer Rouge took over, and they had this 4-year reign, and then after that, towards the end, the Khmer Rouge was kind of starting to struggle. Their army was weak. They actually went in and tried to take over Vietnam, actually, and that went very
We know how that tends to go.
Yes, that went very poorly. Vietnam actually came back in and pretty much destroyed them entirely and sent
Yeah.
a lot of the Khmer Rouge back into the jungle where they had came from. And this is where Vietnam took over, set up their cities, and then the Russians actually came down, and this really started to make everyone mad because they were trying to push their views of communism onto
Yeah.
what was going on down there. So the Khmer Rouge still kind of in the side. They were a thorn in the Vietnamese and the government in general.
Yep.
And it took about 30 years of this until the prince, actually the original one, had came back, and the Khmer Rouge was still a problem. So
But they didn't have a lot of power. It
They-
was just
they
in the
didn't have-
northern jungle, right?
yes,
Yeah.
but they were still a problem. They
Yeah.
they still had few attacks and stuff like that, and the prince actually offered them basically amnesty. So all of everything that they had done, they didn't get charged for if they were to come out and stop what they were doing.
It's not unlike the Civil War,
So they
the
all
American Civil War.
Yeah.
Yeah.
they all came out, and these people, for killing anywhere from 1.7 to 2 million people, didn't have not a single one of their leaders was charged with anything. They
Yeah.
were put on trial. Yeah, at this time.
Yeah, 3 people were recently put on trial just within the couple of years, and it cost around $300 million to do so, and there were no death sentences handed out either. It was just jail time for the life sentences.
Wow.
And it wasn't even the high leadership because Pol Pot died in 1998, and besides that, it's kind of unknown about the other leaders because it wasn't like the Nazis where they kept extensive files and
Right.
you know where they knew who the leaders were. It was very, I don't know how to say it, was very primitive in the way that the government ran.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
just someone saying an order and that was being passed down.
Grassroots.
Yeah, grassroots.
Yep.
So overall, you know, it was a terrible time in Cambodia's history, but it's nice to see that Cambodia now is a democracy that has risen back up, but the effects of this genocide are still heavy within the Cambodian people. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to Deplorable Acts in Human History with Griffin and Hayden. Thank you, Atticus, for joining us.
You know, it was my distinct pleasure to be on your show today.
Thank you, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening.